Now, I want to talk to you about two parts of what you just said. One being the possibility that one day we can upload our mind or make copies of our mind.
You up for it? You want to upload into here?
No,
I could use a little Joe Rogan on my phone.
You can just call me, dude. I'll give you I'll give you the organic version. But do you think that that's a real possibility inside of our lifetime, that we can map out the human mind to the point where we can essentially recreate it? But if you do recreate it without all the biological urges and the human reward systems that are built in, what the fuck are we? I mean,
that's a different question.
Right.
I mean, I think...
What is your mind?
Well, I think that there's two things that are needed for... Let's say human body uploading to simplify things.
Body uploading.
There are two things that are needed. One thing is a better computing infrastructure than we have now to host the uploaded body. And the other thing is a better scanning technology, because right now we don't have a way to scan the molecular structure of your body without freezing you, slicing you, and scanning you, which you probably don't want done at this point in time. Right?
Not yet.
So assuming both those are solved, I mean, you could then recreate in some computer simulation, an accurate simulacrum of what you are, right?
But that's where I'm getting. This is where I'm getting at. An accurate simulacrum that's getting weird, because of the biological variability of human beings. We vary day to day. We vary dependent upon
and your simulacrum would also vary day to day, so it would deviate.
You would program it in to have flaws? Because we vary dependent upon how much sleep we get, whether or not we're feeling sick, whether we're lonely.
So if your upload were an accurate copy of you, then the simulation hosting your upload would need to have an accurate simulation of the laws of biophysics and chemistry that allow your body to, evolve from 1 second to the next.
My concern is that it's going to recognize...
your upload would change second by second, just like you do, and it would diverge from you, right? So, I mean, after an hour, it will be a little different. After a year, it might have gone in a quite different direction for you.
It'll probably be a monk, some super god monk living on the top of a mountain somewhere in a year. If it keeps... It
depends on what virtual world it's living in.
True.
I mean, if it's living in a virtual world...
a virtual world. It'll be a virtual world. You're not talking about the potential of downloading this again into a biological
There's
entity.
a lot of possibilities, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could upload into a Joe Rogan living in a virtual world and then just create your own fantasy universe, or you could 3D print an alternate synthetic body, right? I mean, once you have the ability to manipulate molecules at will, the scope of possibilities becomes much greater than we're used to thinking about.
My question is, do we replicate flaws? Do we replicate depression?
Of course.
But why would we do that? Wouldn't we want to cure depression? So if we do cure depression, then we start...
Here's the interesting thing.
Okay.
Once we have you in a digital form, then it's very programmable. So then
we juice up the dopamine, the serotonin
Well, then
levels.
you could change what you want, and then you have a whole different set of issues, right?
Yeah.
Because once you've changed, I mean, suppose you make a fork of yourself, and then you manipulate it in a certain way, and then after a few hours, you're like, well, I don't much like this new Joe here. Maybe we should roll back that change. But the new Joe is like, well, I like myself very well, thank you, right? So there's a lot of issues that will come up once we can modify and reprogram ourselves.
But isn't the point that the ramifications of these decisions are almost insurmountable? Like once the ball gets rolling.
Well, the ramifications of these decisions are going to be very interesting to explore.
Yes, you're super positive, Ben. Super positive. You're optimistic.
Many
about
bad
the future.
things will happen. Many good things will happen. That's a very easy prediction to make.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I wonder.
I mean, think about like world travel, right? Like hundreds of years ago, most people didn't travel more than a very short distance from their home, and you could say, well, okay, what if people could travel all over the world, right? Like, what horrible things could happen? They would lose their culture. Like, they might go marry someone from a random tribe. You could get killed in the Arctic region or something. A lot of bad things can happen when you travel far from your home. A lot of good things can happen. And ultimately, the ramifications were not foreseen by people 500 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're going into a lot of new domains. We can't see the details of the pluses and minuses that are going to unfold. It would behoove us to simply become comfortable with radical uncertainty, because otherwise we're going to confront it anyway, and we're just going to be nervous.
So it's just inevitable. It's
almost inevitable.
Yeah.
I mean, of course,
barring any natural disaster.
Yeah. I mean, of course, Trump could start a nuclear war, and then we're resetting to ground zero.
It's just as likely we get hit by an asteroid, right?
Yeah, I mean, so barring a catastrophic outcome, I believe a technological singularity is essentially inevitable. There's a radical uncertainty attached to this. On the other hand, in as much as we humans can know anything, it would seem commonsensically there's the ability to bias this in a positive rather than the negative direction.
Yeah.
We should be spending more of our attention on doing that rather than, for instance, advertising, spying, and making chocolatier chocolates and all the other things.
Right, but how many people are doing that? I mean, it's prevalent. It's everywhere. But, I mean, how many people are actually at the helm of that, as opposed to how many people are working on various aspects of technology all across the planet? It's a small group in comparison.
Working
relatively.
on explicitly bringing about the singularity is a small group.
Right.
Yeah. On the other hand, supporting technologies is a very large group. So think about like GPUs. Where did they come from? Accelerating gaming, right? Lo and behold, they're amazingly useful for training neural net models, which is one among many important types of AI, right? So a large amount of the planet's resources are now getting spent on technologies that are indirectly supporting these singularitarian technologies. So as another example, like microarrayers that let you measure the expression level of genes, how much each gene is doing in your body at each point in time. These were originally developed, as an outgrowth of printing technology. Then instead of squirting ink, Affymetrix figured out you could squirt DNA, right? So, I mean, the amount of technology specifically oriented toward the singularity doesn't have to be large, because the overall, spectrum of supporting technologies can be subverted in that direction.
Do you have any concerns at all about a virtual world? I mean,
we may be in one right now, man. How do you know?
That's true. Yeah. But as far as we know,
my problem is I want to find that programmer and get him to make more attractive people.
Well, isn't that I would say that's part of the reason why attractive people are so interesting, is that they're unique and rare.
Yeah. All right.
That's one of the problems with calling everything beautiful.
Yeah.
When people were saying Caitlyn Jenner's beautiful, I was like, well, you have
to
be realistic.
If I get in the right frame of mind, I can find anything beautiful. Actually.
Well, you can find it unique and interesting.
No, I can find anything beautiful.
Okay, I guess, but in terms of like, I guess it's subjective, right? Really, it is. We're talking about beauty, right? Yeah. Now, but existential angst, just on the when people sit and think about the pointlessness of our own existence, like we are these finite beings that are clinging to a ball that spins 1,000 miles an hour, hurling through infinity. What's the point? Like, there's a lot of that goes around already. If we create an artificial environment that we can literally somehow or another download a version of us, and it exists in this blockchain created or powered weird fucking simulation world, what would be what would be the point of that?
What I really believe, which is a bit personal and maybe different than many of my colleagues, what I really believe is that these advancing technologies are going to lead us to unlock many different states of consciousness and experience than most people are currently aware of.
How so?
You say we're just insignificant species on a speck of rock hurling in outer space.
I wouldn't say we're insignificant. I would say there's people that have existential angst because they wonder about what the purpose of it all is. I don't fall into that category.
I tend to feel like we understand almost nothing about who and what we are, and our knowledge about the universe is
far smaller than that.
Extremely minuscule. I mean,
Right.
if anything, I look at things from more of a Buddhist or phenomenological way. Like there's sense perceptions, and then out of those sense perceptions, models arise and accumulate, including a model of the self and a model of the body and a model of the physical world out there. And by the time you get to planets and stars and blockchains, you're building like hypothetical models on top of hypothetical models. And then, we're by building intelligent machines and mind uploading machines and virtual realities, we're going to radically transform, our whole state of consciousness, our understanding of what mind and matter are, our experience of our own selves, or even whether a self exists. And I think ultimately the state of consciousness of a human being like 100 years from now, after a technological singularity, is going to bear very little resemblance to the states of consciousness we have now. We're going to see a much wider universe than any of us now imagine to exist. Now, this is my own personal view of things. You don't have to agree with that to think the technological singularity will be valuable, but that is how I look at it. I know, like Ray Kurzweil and I agree there's going to be a technological singularity within decades at most. And Ray and I agree that, if we bias technology development appropriately, we can very likely, guide this to be a world of abundance and benefit for humans as well as AIs. But Ray is a bit more of a down-to-earth empiricist than I am. Like he thinks we understand more about the universe right now than I do. So, I mean, there's a wide spectrum of views that are rational and sensible to have. But my own view is we understand really, really little of what we are and what this world is. And this is part of my own personal quest for wanting to upgrade my brain and wanting to create artificial intelligences. It's like I've always been driven above all else by wanting to understand everything I can about the world. So I've studied every kind of science and engineering and social science and read every kind of literature. But in the end, the scope of human understanding is clearly very small, although at least we're smart enough to understand how little we understand, which I think my dog doesn't understand, how little he understands, right?
Yeah.
So, and even like my 10-month-old son, he understands how little he understands, which is interesting, right? Because he's also a human, right? So I think, everything we think and believe now is going to seem absolutely absurd to us after there's a singularity. We're just going to look back and laugh in a warm-hearted way at all the incredibly silly things we were thinking and doing back when we were trapped in our primitive biological brains and bodies.
That's stunning that in your opinion or your assessment is somewhere less than 100 years away from now.
Yeah, that's requires exponential thinking, right? Because
that's hard to wrap your head around, right?
I don't know. It's immediate for me to wrap my head around.
But for a lot of people that you explain it to, I'm sure that's a little bit of a roadblock. No?
It is. It took me some time to get my parents to wrap their head around it because they're not technologists. But I find if you get people to pay attention and sort of lead them through all the supporting evidence, most people can comprehend these ideas reasonably well.
Go back to computers from 1963.
It's just hard to grab people's attention. And mobile phones have made a big difference. Like I spent a lot of time in Africa, in Addis Ababa, in Ethiopia, where we have a large AI development office. And, the fact that mobile phones and then smartphones have rolled out so quickly, even in rural Africa, and have had such a transformative impact. This is a metaphor that lets people understand the speed with which exponential change can happen.
When you talk about yourself and you talk about consciousness and how you interface with the world, how do you see this? When you say that we might be living in a simulation, do you actually entertain that?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
I think the word simulation is probably wrong, but yet the idea of an empirical, materialist physical world is almost certainly wrong also. So I mean,
How so?
Well, again, if you go back to a phenomenal view, I mean, you could look at the mind as primary, and your mind is building the world as a model, as a simple explanation of its perceptions. On the other hand, then what is the mind? The self is also a model that gets built out of its perceptions. But then, if I accept that your mind has some fundamental existence also, based on a sort of I-you feeling that you're like a mind there, our minds are working together to build each other and to build this world. And there's a whole different way of thinking about reality in terms of first and second person experience, rather than these empiricist views like this is a computer simulation or something.
Right, but you still agree that this is a physical reality that we exist in, or do you not?
What does that word mean?
That's a weird word, right? It is weird.
I mean,
like,
if you
what,
look,
is it your interpretation
so if you
of
look
this physical reality?
If you look in modern physics, even quantum mechanics, there's something called the relational interpretation of quantum mechanics, which says that there's no sense in thinking about an observed entity. You should only think about an observed, observer pair. Like there's no sense to think about something except from the perspective of some observer. So that's even true within our best current theory of modern physics, as induced from empirical observations. Right?
But in a pragmatic sense, if you take a plane and fly to China, you actually land in China.
I guess, yeah.
You'd guess? Don't you live there?
I live in Hong Kong, yeah.
Well, close to China.
I mean,
sort of China.
I have an unusual state of consciousness.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, if you think about it, like, how do you know that you're not a brain floating in a vat somewhere, which is being fed illusions by a certain evil scientist, and 2 seconds from now,
he's going to pull the
this
plug.
simulated world disappears, and you realize you're just a brain in a vat again. You don't know that.
You're right. But based on your own personal experiences of falling in love with a woman and moving to another part of the world.
But these may all be put into my brain by the evil scientist. How do we know?
But they're very consistent, are they not?
The possibly illusory and implanted memories are very consistent.
Yes.
I guess my own state of mind is I'm always sort of acutely aware that this simulation might all disappear at any one moment.
You're acutely aware of this consciously on an everyday basis?
Yeah, pretty much.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Why is that? That doesn't seem to make sense. I mean, it's pretty rock solid. It's here every day. I mean,
so your possibly implanted memories lead you to believe.
Yes,
yeah,
my possibly implanted memories lead to believe that this life is incredibly consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly consistent.
This is Hume's problem of induction, right? From philosophy class, and it's not, and it's not solved.
I'm
right?
with you in a conceptual sense.
Yeah.
I get it.
I just feel this philosophy.
But you embody it, right? This is something you carry with you all the time.
Yeah. On the other hand, I mean, I'm still carrying out many actions with long-term planning in mind.
Yeah,
right?
that's
Like
what I'm saying.
I've been working on designing AI for 30 years.
You might be designing it inside a simulation.
I might be, and I've been working on building the same AI system, since we started OpenCog in 2008, but that's using code from 2001 that I was building with my colleagues even earlier. So, I mean, I think long-term planning is very natural to me, but nevertheless, I don't want to make any assumptions about what sort of simulation or reality that we're living in.
Yeah.
Right? And I think everyone's going to hit a lot of surprises once the singularity. We may find out that this hat is a messenger from after the singularity. So it traveled back through time to implant into my brain the idea of how to create AI and thus bring it into existence.